Hey there, folks. Rudros here with my end of Opus wrap-up friend, and that is Mr. Cool himself, Alex Hancox, all the way from the great country of England. Alex, how are you, sir?
What's up, bruvs? Great to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm always happy to have you. Glad we could work this in as this Opus is winding down. Spoiler season itself is winding down. I think we got the last card of the week coming out this week. And for anyone watching, my spoiler will be out this Friday. So make sure you tune in and watch it. And I hope you enjoy it. So normally when we do this, we've done this kind of a few different ways. Sometimes we've talked about cards specifically. Sometimes we've talked about tournaments in the meta. I think we're just going to free flow this time. We're just going to chit chat and we'll see. Hopefully good discussion comes of it. Hopefully we're not both just sitting here like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So, okay, well, let's start with some of the obvious. So, meta wrap up, Opus 18. People always talk about the triangle, and you're a competitive player. Do you believe in the triangle? The idea of like, you got your late game deck, you got your super mid-range deck, and you got your aggro deck. Is that a thing? Does that apply to Opus 18?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a triangle, but yeah, there's kind of three tiers of like central deck themes in the meta most of the time.
I guess the triangle idea, and again, I don't know if it applies to FF, but I think it comes to the idea that, like, well, the aggro deck should prey on the late game deck, the late game deck beats the mid-range deck, and the mid-range deck beats the aggro deck. And correct me if you see this differently. I think Wind as the late game deck is pretty obvious. Which version of it? I guess that's debatable. Mono Wind, Ice Wind. And then I would say Water is, of course, the mid-range deck. Aggro, I'm not so sure on. Didn't actually see a ton of Avalanche this set, at least where I played, which is surprising since they got two new pieces. Maybe you could call it Ice Lightning. I don't know. What do you think? What fit into those categories?
Yeah, I think Ice Lightning is the most represented aggro deck. I shouldn't think there's been a lot of reasons for people to play aggro outside of that. I mean, like, yeah, Avalanche kind of quickly falling prey to mono water, I think, and then you see the occasional like Ice Fire list from the diehards, and they always kind of give Wind a run for their money, but overall, yeah, it hasn't been too much aggro presence, I think.
Why do you think that is? Or even Avalanche specifically. Avalanche got Billy Bob and Polk, and technically Nio, not that anyone needed her. And when I've played it, like, those pieces really help it. Being able to go turn one elf, get Polk, having Billy Bob as another attacker, like, it's even stronger than it was. What happened? Is it just a bad matchup against Water? Like, what's going on with Avalanche?
I mean, I personally don't think any of the new cards were a particularly good addition to what the deck was trying to do before, with just trying to be like hyper aggressive with turn 2 Barrett double operative. These days it's just kind of falling prey to not only EX burst from Water, but just the stuff they have in hand. You know, if they go turn 1 Una, at any point you're risking something like a 3-drop Leviathan, being able to just discard one card to bounce the Barrett, and they just can lose a lot of their momentum really quickly. Deck was already actually quite vulnerable to the 9 CP Leviathan. Like, if you didn't have Amaterasu or the recent Titan to kind of stop it, that thing could just come down off one backup and nuke your board. Yeah, I just think there's a lot of reasons Water gives that makes Avalanche awkward, and it's more the fact that it's not even guaranteed versus Wind. You know, I've seen enough games where Avalanche is definitely favored versus Wind. I mean, it's a matchup I don't want to play, but I've seen enough where it's more like 30%, I think, for the Wind deck, rather than like 10% like it has been in the past with really bad matchups. So even then, you might just take Avalanche, lose to a couple of Water decks, and also maybe run into a really good Wind draw, and you don't sort of kill them fast enough, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's fair. How so in that matchup, Wind versus Avalanche, this is my analysis of it. I want to hear yours. Is it so dependent on seeing Wedge or not? Because Wedge is what takes out their resources, right? It breaks the early Northstalin, it breaks the early Fat Chocobo Sam. Those are usually cards a normal Wind deck wants to see early so they can start ramping and setting up. But if you don't see that Wedge, yeah, even if you're drawing an extra card off of Biggs, you're not like hampering their resources. Is it that simple, or do you think there's more to it than that?
Kind of that simple. I mean, depends. Sometimes it depends who goes first as well. Like if
Mm.
the Avalanche player goes first, opens that Earth back up into Barrett, and then has the potential to threaten the attacks from turn 2, means they can be doing that extra point of damage or two, which always matters. But Wedge is probably the defining factor overall, because if Wind still gets his couple of turns of setup, as long as it's on 3 backups versus Avalanche, that's when like the Typhon starts being online, and
Yeah.
that slows them down a lot because Typhon gets to be a forward, comes down on curve, and 3 is just that kind of sweet spot where you get to combo off just enough to be able to hold off the aggression, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, that's kind of what I was curious about Avalanche. So let me mention Ice Lightning. Obviously, it got some new cards this set, got 3 new dual elements, although I don't think anyone really used the Laguna. I feel like I haven't really seen like a defined build for it. Like I feel like the water builds are, there's some changes, but the water builds all kind of have a similar feel. Same with the Ice Wind and the Mono Wind. But Ice Lightning, obviously you have your core cards, Zeramis, Alcid, Sephiroth, the new Lightning. It's so confusing to say Lightning and Lightning. But other than that, some people try really more aggro stuff. Some people have tried more control-y stuff with the Nero and the Vice. I've seen it top quite a few sections. It has felt good to play. What do you think about Ice Lightning? Was it just the addition of the Sephiroth and the Lightning? Was there something? Is there something else there? Like, why do you see that as like I would name that as the aggro deck?
It's just the deck that naturally puts the most pressure up against a deck that's like not trying to interact very much. That's what Win tries to do in the early game. It tries to rely on you doing as little as possible, because as long as you don't attack, you can attack the life, that's fine, but attacking the resources in hand, and the backups obviously, like Avalanche does, is a big deal. So stuff like just turn 1, turn 2 Orphan, just dealing a point of damage a turn and discarding a card each turn can rack up really quick, and it does like okay-ish versus water. Like I feel like it's the one that's the least vulnerable to the EX bursts, but it still doesn't really have the stopping power to get there most of the time. But we just got like cards like Zeromus that can just kind of spell doom. That's a big deal no matter what the matchup is. So I think it's just the aggro deck with the overall strongest individual cards that work well together.
Nice. That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah, Zeromus is definitely still that. He can be that time bomb and that hey, do you have an answer for this? Okay, well, your board's going to not exist next turn, and I'm just going to kill you. The Sephiroth is obviously very good, but you know what? I'm glad you brought up the water matchup. I've seen this happen to a lot of other players, and I've had to experience it myself where, man, I wonder... the whole has to be dull target thing. I wonder if they'll ever break away from that, and do you think that still hampers Ice? Because I know I felt against the water matchups, they'll bring the Leviathan Lord of the Whirl in for free, and they know you've got Sephiroth in hand, and they just won't attack with it, and they just won't dull it. And so I now have to spend extra resources to get the thing dull just so I can target it with the Sephiroth in the first place to get it off the board. I know other Ice Lightning players have shared my misery on that. I don't know if you've played it much at all yourself. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, Sephiroth's one of those cards where it's nicely designed around the whole dull mechanic, because if it said active forward, it'd be pretty stupid. Like, it'd just be, like, break any forward, leave an 8k body behind that also generates value. Like, it's already really good as is. But yeah, I mean, Ice definitely needs to, like, there are cards that are weak in Ice that are made weaker by the fact they say dull forward. Sephiroth's not really one of the ones that gets hit like that, but I can see where you're coming from, I suppose.
Let me think. What else about Ice Light? Did you play much Ice Lightning this set, or was it more you left that to others? What was your deck? What did you want to play this set?
I mean, I was messing around with different wind and water builds. So I was trying to figure out how good Ash was as a card, because I was thinking at first Ash wasn't that great. I thought it was like too much effort to go to 5 backups. Then we started seeing these fairly low backup count decks do really well just because Sildra could turbo the backups out. And then Wind, I was like, do I just keep playing Storm, because Storm's obviously insane, just do Luso stuff? Or do I try out some different stuff, which I did with Yuffie? And Yuffie was kind of cool, but that's just about as far as it went because I didn't really have much of a reason to play anymore. On the Ice Lightning front, it was all stuff I was playing against. A lot of my local players were on Ice Lightning.
Mm.
Even people that hadn't even really picked up Ice Lightning before, they were just kind of picking it up, playing it, and enjoying it because it's quite um, like it's straightforward in a good way. It sort of simplifies
Yeah.
things from the off. Um, it's all about timing and uh, yeah, there's a lot of top decks involved. Obviously, if the Wind player top decks the Typhon at the right time, or if you top deck the Lightning at the right time. But overall, there's actually quite a lot of decisions that go into the matchup. But it also just has a fairly good time versus Wind, so you don't feel like you're banging your head against a wall in that matchup.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned wind, so let's talk about that because in particular, I saw both mono wind and ice wind, and I got to ask a few people their opinion on if they thought one was better than the other. I know, I mean, obviously, Icewind got some insane new multi-element cards, such as Sid Haze. But did you have kind of a preference one or the other, even whether it's you playing it or watching someone else did it? Did you favor one or the other? It seems like they both were successful, just doing what Wind does. So
Yeah, realistically, I'm at the point with Win now. If you can play it mono, you probably should. It's just a lot easier that way. The way everything curves out is better. There's just less things to worry about in an already very complex deck. Ice Wind is like just the more high roll version. It's definitely more powerful because it can do all the things Mono Wind does, with the added Sid Haze and lock on top. But I've just never it's never really been that comfortable for me in any opus that I've tried to play in. I've always had issues with the backups, would have had issues with like running out of steam too quickly. Um, Even some matchups where you're under pressure, you can dull freeze them for a little while, but maybe you can't do it forever. Sid Haze helps with that now, but yeah, I don't know. It just doesn't suit me so well, which surprises me because Sid Haze is a card I'd love to play, but yeah, it's very hard for me to build an Ice Wind deck and be happy with the any of the actual ice cards I put in.
yeah.
It just starts to feel weird when you're just playing like 40 pure wind cards and like 10 ice cards that are all multis as well, and a couple of backups tucked in there as well, ice backups. It's just, yeah, it just never really feels good.
I've seen the matches that have gone south for Ice Wind players where their biggest hurdle is getting that ice backup down. I don't know how many you want. I don't know if your perfect ratio would be 3 wind, 2 ice, or whatever the ratio. But you obviously at least want to have one so you can use that to put out your Sid Haze or your lock, on curve without having to spend extra CP or whatever. So, whereas obviously, like you said, mono wind, you don't have to worry about that. Every backup you play is going to be something you can use. So. No, that's interesting. Man, Icewind is it's a terror. It can do all the stormy stuff Wind can, except it can also hurt your opponent directly. Like I've had 6 characters dull frozen on my board and lost 3 cards from hand in one turn just from Sid Haze and bounce and lock and Chocobo and lock and all that stuff to death. So the opposite of whatever fun is the experience of that match. So that's Wind. Do you have anything else you want to mention on Wind? Otherwise, I'll move on to Water.
Well, I mean, there's the Yuffie is the other.
Oh yeah, please.
Thing to talk about, right? Like a lot of Yuffie decks coming out early days, playing like 12 Yuffies, playing 3 Mist Dragons and 20 Lails and Titan and anything else that could protect Yuffie, and that was cool. And I was kind of waiting to see if one of them would sort of take over. There wasn't really. A couple of the Wind builds, like the normal kind of mono Wind build, slotting in some Yuffies for that extra help versus aggro with some extra removal. And I liked it overall. It wasn't very good versus water, but it was very good versus the aggro decks. Like there were very specific windows where you could Sephiroth, but apart from that, Yuffie was always being Ice Lightning. It would also, be Avalanche if you saw it early enough there as well. So I think that's another sort of nail in the coffin for aggro, in that the Wind decks had this adaptability now that it was already had such a decent water matchup that it could afford weakening the core overall with Yuffie, in order to cover the really kind of weak matchups. So yeah, Yuffie is just a really interesting card. It's like a less oppressive Neo X Death. Like there's both more ways to answer Yuffie than there were when Neo X Death came out, and also it still lets your opponent play the game. It just kind of puts them on a clock. So from a design standpoint, Yuffie's really cool. I just don't know if we're gonna keep seeing it too much after this set, 'cause I don't know how much more you can do with a card like that.
That's
to
crazy because it's
keep it.
so strong. So, do you think for Yuffie to be successful right now, do you think you have to play a bunch of other Yuffies for her special, or do you think just putting 3 copies of the big Yuffie in, and then if the special comes up, it does, is enough?
So for me, the mono wind build I was playing 6 Yuffies, so 3 of the 1-drop, 3 of the 5-drop, and then you had Azura and Stiltskin to get back and search the 1-drop Yuffie for the S.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you can get away with lower copies the more ways you have to recover the ones you've already seen. But yeah, you notice it sometimes where you just need to have another Yuffie sometimes, and you don't have it. But also having too many Yuffies leads you to kind of not doing a whole lot other than just attacking with Yuffie each turn. So there's definitely a fine balance. So maybe that's what needs to change. There needs to be a way to play Wind that isn't like either dedicated Yuffie or dedicated Storm. Like if there's a mid-range build that can play Yuffie and have other threats alongside it. Because right now all the threats in Wind are geared towards doing a bunch of casts in a turn, and Yuffie doesn't appreciate that because she's just a static, heavy 5 CP girl.
Did you ever get to do any of the Yuffie Bismarck turns where you Yuffie Bismarck? Brrrr, and then
I did personally. I did watch one at the UK event we had a couple of months ago, and that when it happened, the guy didn't even realize that Yuffie activated all his forwards.
Oh,
And I was
really?
like, yeah, you got the thing, and then he's like, oh damn, this card's even better than I thought it was, and I was like, yeah, man, that's pretty neat. I mean, it's a very dream scenario having 2 heavy 5-drops on the board at the same time, but yeah, when stuff like that works, it's really cool.
Yeah, that's fair. Shall we talk about water?
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, I got some right here.
Yeah. Oh, I'll have some as well. A deck I thought would be good because, of course, it got all these new bonuses. Definitely didn't anticipate it being quite as good as it is. So, what made water the powerhouse that it was? So, here's some obvious answers, right? Echidna was a really good new monster it got. Lena, really good forward, especially everyone knows being able to play Leviathan Lord of Whirl for free is very strong. Ash, it sounds like you weren't as sold on the Ash originally, but I think people have put that one to pretty good use. The Geomancer backup maybe had more effect than I originally thought, just because it's a different cost search for Syldra. Again, maybe that was something I didn't really anticipate. Or have I just missed something else entirely? What made water what it was this set?
I mean, Lena is the standout kind of card. Like, obviously, Syldra is the one everyone's kind of attributing to and saying has got to go, which I don't necessarily disagree with. But Lena is probably the biggest reason why we're seeing something like Syldra be watched so carefully, because Lena is a 1-card, well, kind of a 1-card win condition, 1.5 card win condition. The fact that you can search both pieces with Syldra is the main reason it's so strong. But yeah, it's more of just they basically said, look, here's your deck's dedicated win condition, and now you have something to completely build around and towards that always works. Reducing a busted 9 CP forward to 3 CP and tacking another body alongside it is clearly something that worked. You don't have it didn't need testing. Didn't need people to go into the tank and be like, man, is Lena as good as she look? Yeah, man. Like, if water's good enough, then Lena's good enough. It turned out water was good enough, and yeah, it's all really Lena. Like, there's just too many points where, like, it's not just the Lena herself, but the illusion of Lena, the possibility of your opponents, like, on, let's say, even 8 war cards in Break Zone, right? And you just know, because it's water, next turn they could put it to 13, including that Leviathan, and they barely cost them any resources. So if you commit in the wrong way, you get punished. But they don't actually have to have the access to Lena, and even if they do have the access, it's normally through Syldra. So if they don't need to Lena there and then they can just Syldra for Ash and deal with 1 forward at a time, or they could Syldra for blue worms and echidnas and just set up this kind of uninteractable wall of monsters.
Yeah.
So it's always the possibilities of these powerful powerful, like game-changing legendaries that really kind of sets a deck over the edge. And Lena was that, because she's kind of very unassuming, just kind of there, doesn't really take any real estate in your deck. Yeah, it's literally taking 2 slots, but giving you so much with those 2 slots.
I'm glad you brought up uninteractable, because for me, that was another reason, Water was good. I fully agree. I think Lena was a big part of it. I think all the pieces, of course, none of them hurt. Oh, another Waka EX burst, get a free card. Don't mind it. That didn't hurt the deck. No one was like, oh, now I can't play Water. To see these boards, playing every week in the RVA Weekly, and you see these boards of 2 Blue Worms, a Tross, and Echidna. And I've got a sweeper in hand. I've got Hecaton Kyre or Toto or Titan. And it's like, I'm going to get rid of 2-3 forwards, and they're still going to have 4 bodies on the field that I can't interact with. Same with Lena. Lena doesn't create a stack when she comes down. There's no priority change. So the moment she comes down, you don't get to interact until she says, okay, I'm bringing Leviathan back. You can't miss Dragon the Break Zone because of Lena's effect. So, like, you basically have to have Amaterasi for the Leviathan. Like, I definitely felt the uninteractability of that. And I myself, and I know others too, have been like, man, we need like a Shantoto for monsters, because this is just getting silly that I can board wipe them and they still have, half my life point in attackers. How did you feel about monsters, or Echidna in particular? It just seems like 2 cost, gets back the very summon you pitched for it, and an 8k body. It's like, good gravy. I get it has conditional activation, but card's ridiculous.
Well, it's like monster removal when it's good is because it's like tacked on as a bonus or something else. So like Icewind has it great because of lock. That lock just happens to be able to break monsters as well. It's like, do they make monster removal that also does something else, like modal monster removal? Like they did with that one Alexander that either like breaks backups or untaps and draw cards.
Or the Ramu
they make
from
like
Opus 6.
Like, do they make more up-to-date versions of that, and then you just kind of risk nobody plays monsters anymore? It's kind of hard to find that balance of a card that you still want to play the monsters, but there's a comfortable way to deal with them. I mean, I think a ball clear to deal with them would be good. It just so happens all the ball clears we get are like stuff like Sin, where you're playing like a 9 CP dark card to clear the board of monsters. So something a little bit more balanced that doesn't make you feel bad for playing monsters and doesn't make you feel bad for playing the answer would be nice, I guess. But I think out of any problems this format had, monsters weren't really a big one. They're just kind of added nuisance for already established archetypes.
So of course I have to jump on that point you just said. Problems this format had. Did it have problems? If so, what were they? From the eyes of Mr. Cool.
I mean, yeah, honestly, I didn't have any issues with how things looked at the start, how things looked in the middle, how things are looking now, sort of here towards the end. We're sort of entering that 18.5 territory with the FF13 deck, and people are trying to utilize that to try and counter the wind decks a bit, and also the water decks. Like, I think I don't think anything was at a stage where, like, wind is on its second set of dominance, so you could argue that wind was more of a problem last set, and now it's like it's still too good, but it's getting close to being it's getting close to something else kind of taking the reins potentially. But yeah, I don't know, I feel like everything is in the position where a couple of changes in the landscape of good cards and other elements could sway it around, balance things out a bit more. So I'm not sitting here thinking we're in like some tier 0 format where I have to play X. But I'm also like a biased win player, so I'm happy to just play green cards no matter what, to be fair.
I appreciate that you can admit that.
Then, yeah, if green is good, then I'm not going to be too upset about it.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, so speaking of green is good, and this will segue into Warp, which was this new mechanic they added for this set. And we've got a nice green is good Vayne legend coming out, and he deals with Warp. And as a matter of fact, all the Warp stuff we've seen so far, there's a lot of it now that it's almost like they changed the idea on the mechanic within one set, because now there's a lot of stuff that says hey, while you're waiting for this to warp, Golbez, do this other thing. Vayne, you can make it faster when it draws you a card. So to me, and we never get any developer insight, so this is just me reading into it. I read that as they think warp is too long, or that it's essentially not worth it. I think everyone pretty much realized like the most anyone's willing to wait for a warp is 2 turns. Ramza and Theodore are probably 2 of the popular ones. Nobody wants to wait 4 turns for Lunafreya or 5 turns for Garuda. Yeah, warp is a mechanic. What did you think of it? Or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, it's just a weird thing, right? Like you say, there's cards that we're never really intending to play because their warp cost is too high, and you think, well, at that point, just kind of scrap the card. Don't make the card knowing that it needs to be warp 4 or warp 5. Just print a different card, because you have that same problem you have with crystals, where the first set crystals came out, everything apart from Robo-Lacdol just sucked. And it's that same kind of thing with warp, where just most of it doesn't fit. Like I think what they're looking to do with Ramza was good. It was like, clearly Ramza was already a pretty good card, and then you tack the warp on it, makes it better. And not only is it making an already decent card better, it's supporting an archetype that kind of needs that boost.
Mm-hmm.
I just think maybe with these new mechanics, they need to use it to support, like as a support mechanism for archetypes that are struggling. So it's like Charlotta, for example, is a card that doesn't really it makes sense as a warp card. Warp it, take some cards out of your hand now. In a little while, it comes back. Get any card, search your body. But we didn't really need that card. It doesn't really help anyone.
Yeah.
And obviously, based on the format, it hasn't actually done anything. And people are thinking maybe it'll be better with Vayne now and it'd be more interesting. But really, it's not interesting because it's just search anything. It's not gearing you towards a certain way. It's not making you want to play warp. It just has the keyword on it.
Yeah.
So it's whether what they want to do with warp. Do they want it to be like crystals, where it's actually an overarching theme, or is it just we need a new gimmick to stick into the game? Let's do suspend from Magic, that kind of thing.
I absolutely loved what you just said there, and the Charlotta comparison I think is spot on in that. Yeah, it definitely, and I felt the same way about crystals. It felt like a gimmick. It felt tacked on. The Ramza, like you said, he was kind of a good card anyway, and the warp was just like, oh, okay, that's nice. But like Theodore, he feels like he was absolutely designed around the warp, because you don't really want to pay 9 for that card. For a discard 2, you just play Sephiroth at that point. But there's so many cards, the fodder, the Yumcax, the Renoa, the Luna, for all this stuff. Like you said, it was, we'll just tack it on. But I liked your idea that, well, no, don't make that card then. Like, if the only way this is fair is for it to come in 5 turns down the line, well, then it's unplayable. Like, just make something more interesting. And I would almost see kind of what you alluded to there. Like, yeah, why not give it to something specific? Hey, ninjas have this warp ability, and they have that in Magic. Like, they have this ninjutsu effect. Ninjas can warp in, whoa, out of nowhere, and, hit you in the face with a shuriken. Or instead of, I don't know, put it on this tree card. I don't know, fire needs a warp card, I guess, slap it on that thing. So I like that. I would love to see that.
Yeah, I think I'd like to maybe also just see, like, I don't know, I think it's probably something that's going to be around forever now. It's going to be a keyword they're going to push, and then they're going to put on a few cards here and there. It's like they're doing with crystals now. That,
yeah.
There's like a card in every set that uses a crystal or generates a crystal or does something that says crystal on it. But I'd like to see them just dive more into things that not even just necessarily support cards, but make it just play a bit differently. Like what would maybe see like a backup with warp? I was just thinking about it now. Like, do we ever have like stuff that warps for like no cost, like a backup that it doesn't cost anything to warp, but it's like warp 2. So instead of putting the backup down now, you just remove it from the game, and in 2 turns it just comes down as a backup. You haven't actually paid anything for it. It was a 0 cost.
Yeah,
but
you had
waited
to wait
2 turns for it. Would that be an interesting thing? It's just stuff that is just I don't know, just makes that, because the whole warp thing is the main strength of the gimmick is your opponent can see it coming, but you're meant to be doing something really powerful when it comes in. So you've got Theodore, which is really powerful when it comes in, but it's too easy to play around. It's too telegraphed. Something like a backup, waiting a couple extra turns to come in. Something as simple as that is like, So he's played a backup turn one, he's warped that one. So next turn, if he plays a 3-drop and another one, then on turn 3, whatever, he's going to start with 4 backups, and then he's going to be doing this or that. So from that turn, how do I? It's not you're not playing around things, but you're just preparing in advance, knowing that your opponent's going to be like ramped up a bit faster than normal. So how do I deal with that to come in 2 turns, if that makes sense?
No, that's a really interesting idea. And, one of my issues with the Warp 2 is, like you said, it was so telegraphed that you would go in for the Theodore or, let's say, the Ramza, and if they had Amaterasu in hand or the new Leviathan or whatever, cancel. And then they just canceled it, and it just felt so deflating as the person who warped. Like, cool, not only did I wait 2 turns, it didn't even do anything. Like, they just got rid of it anyway. Whereas I like the idea of something like a backup that, and maybe the backup doesn't even have an effect. It's just, hey, you get it for free if you're willing to wait a little bit. Like, that seems more interesting. So I like that idea a lot. And for me, kind of in general, and maybe, I don't know if you felt this way, I've just kind of felt the game's been very stale in general. It just seems like every set, there's the new boogeyman, there's the new big threat to deal with, and I don't feel like I'm playing the game in a real different way, and I kind of had hoped Warp would be that, and it certainly wasn't for me. And something you said last time we talked that has kind of been rolling around in my mind is you said, well, one of the things I'd like to see is for every element to get a big boss monster. And, you could kind of say, hey, Water got it with Lena, right? Lightning had the X-Death from last set. Wind has Bismarck. And yeah, it was like, yeah, that would be cool. Like, give me a ice something that says, hey, for every card they've discarded throughout this whole game, do whatever effect, or I don't know, balance it however you want. But yeah, that was a whole rambling of thoughts that just came out of my mouth. Response.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just like some kind of, just, it would be nice for every element to have a core identity, I think, all of the time. Like, it's fine to have, your archetypes, like your samurais, your dragoons, and your monks, but maybe it is time just everything has a something to, like, lean back on. It's like, if you want to play this color, you'll always have this option. Like, because from this point on, if you want to play mono water, you can. Like, you can always play this Lena Leviathan combo, because it's so, like, it's not a needy combo, it's not like it's not like an Al Cid package from back in Opus 2 where you're playing like 3 Al Cid, 3 Onion Knight, 3 Rigdian. It was taking up 9 forward slots. Also on your deck's dedicated to Al Cid, it's like, you're playing Leviathan anyway. Lena works really well with it, so it doesn't feel like you're really taking up 4 slots or 5 slots. It feels like you're taking up 2 or 3, and it doesn't it doesn't force you. Well, the only thing it forces you to do is play effectively 50 blue cards.
Yeah.
Or 49 blue cards with it, which is fine. That's a good way to kind of restrict a good card. So yeah, just having something like that for each element, just like a really good generic mono fire card, because we keep getting these. Mono fire is one of those ones that gets a lot of mono support, and it's all just kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like, we got this Tidus, and it's like, mill 5, bro. Like, I don't want to mill 5, man.
For a one-time 8K burn. Like,
yeah, it's like, that's
what?
a good effect, but it's like, mill 5 is like, it's just a bit, like, maybe just something that doesn't really have a downside out of the fact that, like, Bismarck has no downside except it costs 5,
Yeah.
Lena has no downside except she's useless until her requirements are kind of met. So something like that for fire. Lightning has it in X-Death, but X-Death is more of a late game thing. Just something where you can just, like, something that would work in kind of any mid-range deck would be a good start, that really is on theme with the identity. But
you said, oh, did I lose you?
no, I don't
Okay,
think
yeah.
so.
So you said 2 points there I want to jump on: the element identity and the make it, don't let it have a downside. So I'll do downside first. To me, their design has been very, for lack of a better word, confused, in the sense that it feels like some of the cards they put out, they designed them as if they were made in Opus 18 or Opus 19. You can tell that they fit. And there's other cards, it feels like they designed them as if it's back in Opus 3 or Opus 4, kind of like some of the fire cards you said, where it's this normal effect that has this big downside. And I guess my hope or desire for overall balance and health of the game and of the elements is that, look, I would prefer if we banned cards and we pulled the power of the game back. Personally, I think it's way too fast, and I don't think it's as fun to play nowadays as it used to be. However, if you don't want to do that, then the other option is, I think you need to push everything. Whereas right now it feels like, well, they'll push water, they'll push wind, maybe they'll go earth some stuff, but fire and ice and lightning, they always, again, like we mentioned earlier with the ice stuff, they keep wanting to attach these downsides to it. And so I guess I'm like, no, either abandon that and say, okay, everything's bonkers, all 6 elements get great stuff, or pull back all 6 elements, because it's really frustrating to be like, oh, well, this category continued to get support, this element continued to get good stuff, but this one, again, is still being designed as if it's an Opus 5. Any response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about something while you said that about like element, because a lot of other card games with their elements, I mean, I don't know how true this is overall, but like there is more of a clear-cut identity on certain things. Like fire or red is normally seen as this quite aggressive color, but fire has no identity right now in that. Is it an aggro deck? Is it a mid-range deck? There's no the only thing for fire right now that calls to me for identity is like Magisa, which is telling me red is aggro, which is fine, but it's like it doesn't it sort of chops and changes too much. Like I kind of wish they would get to a kind of sweet spot. Like let's just agree that Magisa's a good way to play fire. It's aggressive, but it's very interactable. You kill the Magisa, you are a lot more comfortable than if you didn't kill the Magisa on the stack to whatever they did to try and ping it off, something like that, right? And a bunch of my buddies were testing like mono wind versus Magisa in the early stages of the set, and they were basically saying, well, if wind just plays like it normally does, then it has a tough time. But if you main deck tech cards like 4CP Alexander, give yourself more outs to Magisa, then all of a sudden it's more even in the matchup. But the Magisa thing never took off. Fire overall just wasn't strong enough. Like the Magisa package is good, but it's a bit too fragile to see competitive play. So all of a sudden you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about teching for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, the tech of like playing a small amount of yuffies to help with other aggro decks like Ice Lightning is good to see. But there's not only very little reason to tech out your deck too much, because normally it's just better to streamline it towards the one focus. Like Wind is all about streamlining it to casting as many cards as possible rather than individual kind of techie cards.
Yeah.
But it would be nice to see something like that where your deck building decisions matter a bit more, because it feels like once a deck kind of gets established, there's not really any reason to change too many things. Like there's room for maybe 1 or 2 tech cards, but with no sideboard and things like that. Not I'm saying there needs to be a sideboard. It's hard to put techie cards in and try and beat every matchup when it's so focused on like 2 decks at a time, sometimes 3, that there's just not enough reason to innovate. You just play the best version of your deck.
Yeah.
If it has a good matchup, then it wins. If it doesn't have a good matchup, then there's not a lot of time you can do too much about it, because putting the tech cards in makes you weaker in other matchups. And it just it's just you're just back to square one. We just play the normal deck and hope to dodge the weird matchups and stuff like that.
I love your point on that, and it's actually going to segue right into my point about elements. You said having something to the effect of having the best slot of whatever it is. So think of Luso, the 1CP Luso. There's no better card at the moment to put in for what you want it to do. It draws you a card, it's a body, it's going to wipe their board as well. It's the best version of that. Now, if they create a 0 CP Luso in the future that does the same thing, well, guess what? You'll just swap it out for that one, because it's just the objectively best version of it. And if they don't expand the play space and the design space of the game, you're always just going to take, well, this is the best version of that effect I'm trying to go for. In Magic, and I've been playing a lot of it lately, so it has been on my mind, something with the element identity that they do, which I really love, is how you pay for cards. So there's this mono black deck I play, or there's this really potent black sorcery called Invoke Despair. And if it was in Final Fantasy, it would cost 5, and it's a dark card. And it just does this really big effect. It takes out a creature, planeswalker, enchantment, yada, yada, yada. Really strong. But what's interesting about it is in Magic, to cast that card, it specifically costs 4 black mana and 1 of any color. And so you can put it in a dual element deck. You can play it in blue and black, but if you have mostly blues down, you can't actually pay for it. You can't just tap a single black like you could in FF. In FF, you have these decks where, oh, I've got Tyro, I'll tap him for the single wind CP I need or the single lightning CP, and now I can play this off-color card. So I wonder if they could expand into that design space more, because sometimes I think what they're afraid of is, and I think of ice summons in particular with this, well, if we make a really good ice summon, aren't you just going to then see that in an ice wind deck or an ice earth deck? Okay, well, what if you played with it and said, hey, to cast this, so much of it has to be ice? Obviously, you want to balance it and make it, okay, we really got to make it worth it then if 3 of this has to be ice or 2 has to be ice. But, man, to me, that sounds really interesting. I don't know if it would be or not, but what are your thoughts?
That's like I'm trying to think in my head quickly how you work that into Final Fantasy, but something like something a bit like for Sawyer, but instead of it being geared towards using 5 different elements, it's using as many of the same one as possible.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not necessarily like it's a 5 cost, you pay 5 ICP, and it's super absurdly broken like for Sawyer is when you pay 5, because that wouldn't make any sense. But it like slowly stacks up better, so it makes more and more sense to play it with as many of those backups as possible, with the 5th effect being the one that kind of that clinches it, right? Because then that also motivates you to play it. You know, if it's a mono ice 5-drop and it has 5 different effects, obviously if you tap 3 ice backups and discard 2, you discard an ice card, you'd only get 4 effects, right? So it may be also something that motivates you to play more backups of that color as well. So then you couldn't just slot it into ice. Let's say the wind one, you couldn't just play an ice wind with your 1 ice backup, because you would never reach. Well, it would be you'd always be overpaying to reach the full capacity of wind and stuff like that. So I kind of like that way of, for each CP of this card's color, you paid to cast it, you do this effect, and it has a generic effect. But it's just how do you balance it? Like, what kind of cards get it? Do you give it to cards like Firion, and for each CP you paid, you get Ace, Brave, 1K, First Strike, that kind of thing? Or, do you draw a card in there somewhere? Do you discard a card in there somewhere? Like a Faceless kind of card would be kind of cool. Like if you paid for this with 5 ice backups, draw a card, discard a card, Dole Freezer forward, Dole Freezer backup, that kind of thing. But at which point does that get like too absurd? Like, how do you keep that balance? Because well, and you'd have, of course, it would have to test all that. Something I'd like to see too, that I think I would like to see more keywords just for card space. So, for example, everything I just described to you, that would be really wordy to write all that out on a card every time, right? When you cast Physalis, for every ICP you paid off a backup, just have a keyword that says mono, or, in Magic, there's something called domain, call it crystal, they love to rename stuff, call it whatever you want, call it fantasy. But so when I see that keyword, okay, that means every time I pay with this color, it does such and such. And I've wanted that for a long time with like the fight effects, because we have stuff like Titan that makes a forward deal its damage. Does that go through Rydia's protection? What about when they do Hecaton Kyre? Does that go through Rydia's protection? What about when someone deals her damage? Oh, that one actually has ability damage. Like, I would love to just see a keyword. Hey, this one is called, fight. This one is called damage. This one is called earth. Whatever, just so I can see that and go, okay, I got it. Or again, with Rydia, with Barrett, instead of writing that out every time, if Barrett receives damage that is less than his power, reduce the damage to 0 instead. Just call it protect. Call it shell. Barrett has shell. Okay. Any card with shell can't take damage less than its power. Like, it would just make the card so much cleaner, and we could save all this space, because I've secretly suspected sometimes
they write cards in a way because they run out of space, that they would actually like put more effects or change the effect, but they don't have more space on there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's pretty important to them to keep it as condensed as possible. Then there's also the worry that if you make too many keywords, there's going to be the argument that I have too many different keywords to remember and I'm going to get them confused. But then you could just say, well, that's a you problem, bro. Learn it. Learn the rules. But yeah, I can see why they don't make too many more. But I'm surprised. Yeah, there isn't more of a. They put enough kind of protect and shell kind of cards on S abilities, and we have it on cards where it doesn't actually seem to line up as well as you think it would, like the way it works in the games. I think there's some like a Rosa that has protect or something.
Yeah,
it doesn't quite work the way I anticipate protect working, but it's kind of makes sense. But yeah, just having a keyword for these kind of things would be an interesting way of doing it as well. That's kind of the way I know Dragon Ball Super does. It has quite a lot of keywords, and therefore a card might have 3 keywords, but then it also has like a proper, its own unique effect.
Yeah.
Whereas in Final Fantasy, that without that, the cards would just be too long.
Yeah, it's just pure text describing what the words are. Well, and so you brought up specials right there, and that's something I want to touch on too, because that's easily one of the most unique things to this game is the special mechanic and the idea of paying for it with the same character, and it's always just been what it is, which is just kind of an awkward mechanic that unless the special itself is something bonkers like Alua comes to mind, or Glaciella, or it has this alternate cost, it just doesn't see a whole lot of play. And so part of me wonders too, what was it? I think it was the lightning. Like, of course, we're getting 2 more lightnings in this new set, and one of them, what was it? It was the lightning legend one. Yeah, and someone was saying, the water one has this thing called a schemata change, which in the game means she changes jobs. Like, why can't I have something where I can just swap it out for another version of it? And again, instead of gluing that to the card like they do with some of the Onion Knights, why not make that an outside overall rule? Or maybe that's a field effect. I've got this backup that lets me do that. I've got this Midgar arena that says I can swap Cloud out by paying the cost for another Cloud. Because it's a neat idea, but they keep doing these specials, and ultimately it usually hurts you to put the same name card in your deck that many times, because again, unless it's Yuffie or something that can really use it, they're just going to be dead cards later. Any thoughts on specials?
Yeah, that's 2 really interesting ones. So the first thing I was going to say, I really like specials that don't have the S ability actual tag on them. So Preesh, Legend Monk Preesh from a couple of sets ago, that has a special ability. It is discard Preesh. If so, Preesh gains 4k. But if you don't discard Preesh, you gain 2k. That's a good way of doing a special where it's like discard a card for an effect. If it happens to be the same name, boost the effect up a bit, double its potency, something like that. That was really cool. So it made those extra copies of Preesh in your deck. Like with Preesh especially, although it hasn't seen enough play for this to really be noticeable, sometimes it's like, damn, if he has a Preesh in hand here, that's just 2k or 1k too much more than what I'm able to deal with here. So that's a really big influence. And the other thing was what you just said about the schemata change and stuff like that. A pretty common card game trope actually nowadays I'm seeing is like an evolve mechanic, or something where you'll have a lower cost version. It's more lower cost versions of the card, and then there'll be a higher cost one where it'll cost 5, but you'll pay 3 to put it over the original card, like a card with the same name, or you'll discard that card to play it for a cheaper cost. That would be a cool thing to do for Final Fantasy at this point. I think that would be a nice new keyword that, you kind of start the idea of leveling up your character almost, right? That fits with FF and experience.
Oh, I love
where
that.
You start off with your basic version of, like, there's a lot of protagonists where this would make sense as well, right? You got your Barts, your kind of weaker Barts that starts off as a freelancer, and then you've got some heavy costed one that you evolve it, you pay a certain cost, and also if you played it through evolving, like if it came into the field through warp, it gets these other things because he has leveled up, so he's gained a new skill on top of that. So that's a sort of keyword or new mechanic I would definitely like to see, because yeah, I think that's I've always thought that's kind of cool.
Dude, that's brilliant. No, I love that idea, and it's thematic. It fits, like you said, with the idea of leveling up. And great point about the Prish too. Like, can we just do more specials like that? Technically, it's an action ability, but yeah, that's a perfect. What if that Sabin from Opus 17, which I really like? They had that whole Edgar Sabin combo. What if Aura Cannon on its own was 8,000, but if you used a Sabin for it or whatever, now it became 10,000, or it hit 2 targets, or however you want to balance that. Like, so you're not stuck into this, well, it has to be Sabin, otherwise you can't use it. It's like, well, no, you can actually use it anyway, but if it is Sabin, big reward for you. I love that, dude. That's a great idea. So more like the Prish. Speaking of Edgar and Sabin, can I rant a little here since we're in spoiler season, and please tell me about some spoilers. So they come out with this new special based Edgar in Opus 17 that says, hey, if your 6 characters have specials on them, I'm gonna reward you for that. And we haven't seen everything from Opus 19 yet. There's still tons of cards, but based off the Mog and the new Sabin and Edgar we did see, I was like, oh my god, did they just abandon this again? Like, is this another thing they put out there and said, okay, now we're never going to do anything with that? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we have a joke amongst some of my friends that this set is literally just it's funny how it's reprinting like everything with the same name, and they have slightly similar effects. Or they're just like worse versions of the cards that already are kind of out. Like, Edgar Sabin is a cool mechanic. Why is it called Edgar Sabin? There's loads of other pairings of family members, of companions, of whatever you could do this to. Why does it have to be Edgar Sabin when you keep making this effort to print pairings of them? But the spacing is so poor. Like, Edgar's Opus 16 or something? Edgar Sabin 17? I don't know, whichever one. 17.
One set ago.
We're getting another one 2 sets later. It's like, and this is clearly like, it's not even necessarily. It is worse, definitely, because it's a legend and a hero compared to a hero and a rare, I think. But why does it do such similar things?
Yeah,
like this. If this Sabin comes in off Edgar, you're doing at least 8,000 damage to something. But if this Sabin is on the board while this other older Edgar's on the board, you're able to do 8k to something every turn anyway. It's like there's no difference. You got this Vivi that that one was like not really a big offender, but it's like, why is it just called Vivi here? Because it's like this just could be kind of tacked onto any other card name and have the same effect. It doesn't have to be specifically Vivi. You got the fact there's 2 units in this set again. There's like a bunch of other new lightnings, and the constant irony of there's a lightning that wants you to use an Odin, and so far we haven't seen an Odin. Maybe there is one.
Maybe we will, but we saw the lightning.
Maybe there's
summon.
another line of summons, but everyone who saw Rama, they just let out a groan because Rama's not ideal and it's not Odin. It's like, it doesn't quite make sense.
It doesn't. Well, and that's kind of some of that staleness that, for some reason, Golbez or Zidane, or you have characters who get wildly different effects every time they're printed. Water Zidane is different than the Fire Zidane, is different than the Wind Zidane, is different than the Mill Wind Zidane. And Golbez always does something unique, but when it's Sabin, he always has to be tied to Edgar. Like, in FF6, he has an entire scenario by himself with Cyan and Gao and Shadow that he doesn't even see his brother. Or, Tifa cards always have to be tied to Cloud. She can just do her own thing, or Kayn always has to betray you in some way. Caius always, it's just like, guys, come on. Like, and I've played all these games. Like, I appreciate the idea of the theme, but can we do something different? Like, it's so it's so frustrating.
Yeah, and you just got all these cards with the same name, and it's like, I'm just thinking about it now. What characters have we seen? We've got like Golbez's Shadow Dragon that has appeared on. Mist Dragon got its own card, got its own full art, and there's this Shadow Dragon that appears with Golbez and Dissidia. It's like this big kind of boss in the mid game of FF4. It's on this card, the 5-drop art. When are we going to get just a card like that? When are we just going to have all these other random, not even that random, just names we just don't have? Of plenty, like the FFT characters, people. I'm not an FFT guy, but
Oh my
There's
good. Tactics is huge. There's so many characters in that
there's
game.
what is it, Y-Graph and
Dice
you know,
Darg
just
and Duke.
like a
Yeah.
a New Orlando and you know, Gaff Garion and things like that. It's like where are these people? Why? Like, I think the Vivi annoyed me most because it's like, man, you already got it right. That Vivi was perfect. Why are you making a new one?
Yeah.
Why is it Vivi? Just give it any other name, please. Like, help me. Yeah,
Sounds to me like somebody wants a new Ramza and Agrius.
yeah, man.
It's just like, yeah.
Bro,
Gaff.
that Refia, I'll tell you what, that Refia actually is a kind of beacon of light because although it's weird that they made this all these special artworks of these Warriors of Light, printed Refia 20 years ago,
Yeah.
didn't bring out the cast support it until now, and now all of a sudden we're moving on to a new Refia. But thank God it's Refia and not Lena or not Warrior of Light or not Wall or not this or that. Thankfully it's something that we don't have to play the older copies of. It's like it is a genuine upgrade. But that's one of the few outliers in this set so far. So I'm just hoping the other side, that the reason we haven't seen the other side of the set is because maybe it's just characters nobody really knows that much about. They're like, oh, we're going to get people excited with all the characters we've seen from Dissidia Final Fantasy and things like that, and all the random FF11 characters and monsters and stuff can wait until the full spoiler.
Oh man, we can only hope. I'm glad you brought up that Refia and Warriors of Light. So that's a great example of, again, they'll do this weird thing with, I guess you'd call them tribals, these jobs. If you're a samurai, you get love. You'll get supported. Monks, you'll get some love. Dancers, maybe. Dragoons, you'll get another Dragoon forward that doesn't change the deck because it still relies on Alice from Opus 10. And you have Warriors of Light, which have been so multicolored forever. Can we get a Warrior of Light backup that says something similar to Sid Kramer from last set? Hey, your Warriors of Light can be paid with CP of any element. So they'll give that to Soiree. Shinju can come in, and combat butlers are ready to go, to quote, level 1 Onion Knight. Or what about Type 0 cadets? They've been starving for a color fixing backup forever, and they just get nothing. And we'll get another ace. Like, I just don't understand it, and it's very frustrating because I want to play Warriors of Light. I like that archetype, but okay, well, give me the ability to go into the Crystal Barts if I want to, and that Water Lena. Let me really focus on the Crystal thing. Okay, this time I'm going to build around Refia and Ingus and Arc, and that Arc, I'll finally get him his 2K buff because I can play all these colors, and I don't have to just sit there and pray and hope I draw Cosmos and can play that off of it.
Yeah, I mean, that brings to light what you mentioned about Soiree. The reason the Soiree is kind of perfect for its time is because Soiree was completely new. It was a bunch of different colors with completely new jobs, with a category that didn't already have like a lot of background to it, I suppose, in terms of like synergies and stuff. It just had like Akstar really drawing it together. And it's like, it was basically starting fresh. Like, it's the same reason it was so, popular in like L3, L6, things like that, is because it was designed to be modern. With Warriors of Light, the reason they're going to have trouble designing new cards in an Eternal format is because if they make a card like, it would make sense for Warrior of Light Type 0 cadets to get a backup that taps for any CP for these kind of cards, given the way they've spread them around the different elements. But they're probably worried that if they do that, along with new support, then it's going to all mesh together with all the old cards they've created throughout the years. And like one wrong turn can lead to this absolute abomination of a deck that just destroys the format. I don't actually think that's that likely, especially in Cadets' case, because Cadets suck. But, I just think there's that kind of nervousness of they'd rather just make in one way, they'd rather just make a new archetype from scratch, make it really good, and then go from there. The problem is they've shot themselves in the foot by there's not that many archetypes to choose from anymore in Final Fantasy, given what they've done. There's not that many games. Like, it made perfect sense to do it in FFBE because Soiree isn't in anything other than Brave Exvius. It's not like Monks and Dragoons, where there are Monks and Dragoons throughout all the series. So they've tried to include bits and bobs every time they crop up in one. So unless they're prepared to make a new archetype, I don't know what that would be. then from scratch, then we're going to be stuck just getting drips and drabs, and then you're going to start seeing the problem we have now, where the best decks are just amalgamations of all the good cards, like Wind. Its identity is in the mechanic rather than in anything actually to do with Final Fantasy.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is weird. Whereas Samurais is like, the identity is in Samurais, but the identity is really in the fact that Cyan does 1 million spread damage to their entire board, that kind of thing. It's like, it starts getting built around a powerful effect that forces synergy, because that just makes that one thing better, rather than a nice even spread like Soiree had. Like, every card was individually good, working with the whole package. It was actually, honestly, like one of the best designed decks, best designed archetypes they've made, and it's because they made it with 16 opuses of experience kind of already behind them, I think, as well.
You mentioned Samurais. I gotta ask, since it came up, I mean, I don't know if that deck was prominent last set, but, you know, the Heian definitely made a big splash, and you saw it everywhere. I know they didn't get any new cards this set. Is that why they disappeared? They just didn't get a new card, or, again, were they weak to
I mean,
water,
it was already, like, it already wasn't the best deck last set, and that's just kind of what happens in Final Fantasy, right? If the deck already wasn't the best and doesn't get new cards, nobody cares to play it, because everyone wants to play new stuff. And yeah, that's it. Like, you know, Samurai's got literally nothing. Fire got, like, the only thing Samurai's arguably got is like one copy of that Tidus.
Yeah.
And even that's a bit of a push. Whereas, you know, Wind, nothing changed in the archetype, but you got like Dryad, you got Cerberus, you got new toys to play with that did influence the deck enough that it feels a bit more fresh, a few more tools. It was just kind of a shame. But I also understand that they can't support those archetypes every single set. We can't expect a game-changing monk or dragoon every set. But again, it could, like, the identity of monks is built around this Ursula card, and they haven't given Ursula a new card since they put Sophie to 1. And it's like, if you want to support monks, stop making 3-cost preaches. That's we get 2 preaches finally. Job monk. None of them could be summoned off Ursula. It's like, that defeats the purpose a little bit. Like, I appreciate the synergy, but I need a little bit more than that. Please.
Need a little bit more. Okay, I don't know if you agree with the sentiment, but it's a common sentiment that ice summons suck. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, man, they're dreadful.
So, put you on the spot here as a designer. What would make a good ice summon? Like, is it just that they just have too many conditions? Are they overcosted for what they do? Is Dull Freeze just never going to be as effective as taking something off a board? What would a good ice summon be in your eyes?
I think a good ice summon, I think they desperately need a shatter, which is break a frozen character. Whether it's active or dull. I think there needs to be more done with the freeze like the freeze thing in general.
While you're sipping that water, I played a game last night where they had such a small board, I was able to dull freeze everything multiple times, which doesn't do anything. And I said out loud, man, wouldn't it be like awesome if dull freezing this for the 3rd time in a turn or whatever actually did something, like made me draw or broke or whatever. Continue.
Like, I even thought since Opus 1, the fact that freeze didn't do anything to an active forward was weird.
Yeah.
Like, if you freeze me and I'm standing up rather than sitting down, I'm still going to be cold, you know, it's not going to, like, sort of change the fact, is it? So, there's something that, I don't know, like, you know, Free should probably have some kind of thing as well, where it, like, there should be some support card for Freeze, where it, like, turns off the abilities of something. Why not just have an ice summon that, like, you know, choose a frozen character, it loses all its abilities, break it, something like that. Like, because that's how you'd think, you know, if you like, you know, Final Fantasy, if you stab someone with a sword, they kind of, you know, they fall over and they clutch their heart and whatever. But if it's frozen and you make them explode, they're just gone. There is no person anymore. So losing its abilities makes sense, right? You can't put the frozen thing back together and bring it back to life. It's destroyed.
I mean, that's how they do. That's how they do stone in the games, or break. Like if you stone someone and hit them, they shatter.
Yeah, exactly. So something like that would be good for ice. But it's also it's not just even like adding new things to the ice summons. It's the fact that, like, it's all about there are summons that are really good because they like don't. You got stuff like Fanfrit, which works really well in certain situations because it never chooses a forward. It's a select. It's the same kind of thing with ice summons. It's always choose X Dole forward.
Choose a Dole forward of cost 2 or less.
Like it's just so limiting, and the fact that even in the choose is limiting. Ball clears are so potent because cards that say can't be chosen by summon ability, it doesn't work. They still work.
Yeah.
So ice summons are limited in their design scope, and in the fact that they're limited in the range of things they can hit in the first place. So yeah, why would I play an ice summon when I can just play a fire summon or even a lightning summon these days that basically does the same thing without all the extra steps? Like, Dull is inherently flawed because either you have to put other resources into making it dull, or they have to attack. And then if they're attacking, you're either taking a point of damage and dealing with it next turn, or you're dealing with it there and then, having left open CP, or using resources from your hand. So yeah, just very
potentially they got an on-attack trigger or any other myriad of things.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the point about board wipes, and this goes in with my earlier point of if you're not going to pull back stuff in the game, push everything. I have been longing for an ice legend for the longest time that just says enter the field, dull freeze your opponent's board. Personally, I'd like to see it hit backups as well, but if that's too strong, at least all the forwards. And there's still nothing that does that. And yet Earth, we saw this Genova Synthesis card. Earth will gets another, like, why does Earth need to keep getting more board wipes? And so Wind can do it, Earth can do it, Lightning technically even has a version, even though it's terrible. Like, Fire has it. Where's Ice's board wipe? Like, again, please give everything that treatment then, if you're not going to pull some stuff back.
Yeah, I mean, their idea of giving Ice a board wipe is just having
Zalira.
stuff stay frozen. But
yeah,
well, not even that. Just having, like, as in, like, Shiva, Lady of the Frost, right? Is supposed to be their big boss monster. But yeah, it's like with that, like you say, that could have just probably said dull and freeze all your opponent's forwards. But maybe they just, that. I still don't know how that would have been too, because I still think dull 1 and freeze all of them is still kind of close enough.
Well, and again, if freeze affected active, maybe that could be okay. But since they have to be dull, if they have a whole board of active cards, like, that doesn't help me if they're all frozen but active. That doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and that's your big boss monster, and there's no real alternative way to use it. So yeah, and then you compare it to Bismarck and Leviathan, which are a lot more either generic or just more powerful.
Yeah.
Admittedly, Leviathan's a lot more expensive, but then yeah, it doesn't make much sense when Leviathan's a 9-drop, and then 4 sets later it becomes a 3-drop.
Yeah.
Thing, right. So maybe something, that's something, like maybe we get a Yassail that doesn't actually suck in regards to synergy with Shivas.
Yeah, it doesn't directly conflict with the Shiva. All right, you can have this, but you can't have the Searcher for it. Like, what?
Yeah, like, because what is the Yassail? Is it 3-drop 7k, right? Dull it, play Shiva.
And you can dull it and play a 5 cost, I think. It's not, but
yeah, like,
you have to wait a whole turn.
Is it really so bad if you just get a 2-drop Yassail backup that just says dull it, play Shiva from your hand? It's going to be used during your turn.
Yeah,
something like that. So broken, because if it was a 3-drop, you'd still never play it. I know that.
Yeah,
based on past experience with blank 3-drops. But as a 2-drop, is that ridiculous? I don't
think so. And I think that point right there is kind of what I was touching on earlier, is that I don't see how you can allow soirees to be what they are and say, ooh, but it would be too strong if Type 0 had that. I don't see how you could look at the Assail you just mentioned and think, ooh, that's too strong. But it's totally okay for Wind to be set up and ready to beat my ass in on turn 3, or for Water to just completely dominate the game and wash me away, pun intended. Like, if all those things are allowed, okay, but then allow me to do this stuff too. Like,
Yeah, there's no way a Yassail like that isn't fair if Althea exists.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Althea lets you replay any card you like, including herself as well. Whereas this Yassail would just be playing an extra card from your hand, for example. Yeah, which is like kind of the same thing in reverse, but Althea is obviously, the way the game is, the way Wind is, substantially better than even that is. So, yeah.
Are you planning, I'm assuming you're planning to go to some of your events this year? Get that world spot?
Yeah, we got booked to the UK event. Still waiting on details for the Belgium one, and then wait to see what happens with the rest of them because those are the first two. So
Is your store hosting one of them?
My store won't be. It's not hosting a Materia Cup.
Okay.
No. Yeah, probably good things to come later on in the year anyway.
Awesome.
But yeah, yeah, I'm looking forward to getting to playing again. But until this new set comes out, I just can't. There's just no point. I've unfortunately better things to do with my time than play in a format that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, someone was asking me that the other day. Well, what should I do? I was like, well, we got to wait till the new set comes out, and then I can tell you what is and isn't strong and what stuff will fall off. I guess we've been talking for a while here. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on? Do you want to wrap up?
Is there anything else? Not particularly. No. I mean, I'm hoping they reveal some more FF12 targets for Fran, because I saw this new Varn, this Firewind Varn, and that was one of the most depressing cards I've seen this set.
You mean you weren't stoked for that very generic multi-element Vaughn?
No, that was peak, bro. That's what that was. Yeah, that card sucks. That's sad. But anyway.
That's fair. Okay, so kind of speaking of that Vaughn, I have one final point I want to ask you about. So in FF, especially since about Opus 10, the sets have really changed as far as like what's been the boogeyman between every set. Martritz, dominant in 11, gone the next set. Opus 12, Storm, Kryl, Shikari's gone the next set. 13, Sophie, and then Doga at the end of it, and then obviously gone once it gets banned. 15, Sky Pirates. Oh my god, Sky Pirates, this is the best deck in the game. You can't even touch this thing. Avalanche. Next set gone. You don't even see it. And I wouldn't be surprised, based on that trend, that no one plays water next set. Why do you think that happens? Do you think there's a balance reason behind it, or do you think it's just players just want to try the new things and they've played this deck for a whole format, and so they just want to move on and try something else?
I mean, some people like to play new things. Some people like to play the same thing. It really depends on if the deck either came out like an Opus earlier in power level, which is basically what happened with Soirees. So it was really good for one set and then decent a second set, dead in the third set, which is this one. It happens a lot less with stuff like, I think water will still definitely be around next set. It might not be as good, but it'll still be playable because it's an element, right? Mono water is not entire water element.
Yeah.
Sky Pirates, right? If you just give it a wave of support and it's sort of at its peak, it can only go downhill from there if you just don't give it more support. But you're always going to print new water cards. And in theory, new water cards are going to be good. Same with Wind, right? Wind was super busted last set, and it's still got more good cards this set, so it's still super busted. And yeah, unless they just print no good Wind cards this set, it's going to be really tough for Wind to not continue to succeed. So
good insight.
Yeah, it's more of a case of archetypes rather than elements.
I love it, sir. I greatly enjoyed this. I think this worked really well, just shooting the breeze and chit-chatting, and I love to hear all your thoughts. I guess we're going to wrap up here, folks. Alex, anyone you want to give a shout out to or any final parting words?
No, not really, bro. To be honest, I'm just always happy to be here, happy to chit-chat. Thanks
Fair enough.
Everyone at home who checked it out and gave us a look.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We will see you in the From Nightmares competitive season. I know I'll be rooting for Alex, hoping to see him succeed. And let us know what you think below. Just anything you I know there wasn't like a defined topic for this one. Just what did you think of Opus 18? What cards did you like, hate? Anything you feel like sharing, your thoughts are always appreciated. Alex, thank you for being here, sir. And until next time, folks, take care.
Stay cool.